I still remember that night like it just happened. The lights in the operating room were cold, sharp and unmerciful. Machines beeped in a rhythm that felt more like a countdown than a lifeline. And on that table lay Daniel, a man whose heart had stopped believing long before his body began to give up. He had been fighting for months. Stage 4 infection, complications from a failed surgery, kidneys shutting down, you name it. The doctors had already whispered what no family ever wants to hear. We've done everything we can. His wife, Anna, stood outside the glass window, her hands trembling against it, her lips moving in silent prayer. But inside that room, Daniel was slipping away. I was there. I saw the monitor flatline. The room froze in that dreadful tone, the one that says life has just left the body. Nurses scrambled, the surgeon shouted orders, compressions began. But deep inside, I felt something shift. It was as if time itself hesitated, waiting. Then, as the doctors fought to bring him back, Daniel's soul stepped into another place. A place no science can describe. He said later that everything went silent. No pain, no fear, just peace. And in front of him stood a figure, not dazzling with fire or thunder, but radiant with a love so powerful it broke him. Jesus stood there, not as an idea, not as a story, but as the living truth. Daniel said Jesus looked into his eyes and asked one question, "Do you know me?" Tears ran down his face, not of sorrow but recognition. "I've heard about you all my life," he whispered, "but I never truly believed." Jesus reached out his hand, and Daniel said it felt like warmth itself entered his chest. "Then believe now," Jesus said, "because your story isn't finished." And in the same moment, Daniel gasped back on the operating table as the monitor screamed back to life. The nurses jumped back. The doctor shouted, "He's back!" Anna collapsed to her knees outside, crying uncontrollably. No one could explain it. His heart had stopped for 4 full minutes. No brain damage, no lingering effects, only peace, a peace that didn't come from medicine. When I visited him later in the ICU, Daniel's first words weren't about the surgery or the pain. He said, "I met him. I saw the one who healed me before I even knew I needed healing." He told me that while his body was lifeless, his soul saw the truth, that even death must bow before the name of Jesus. That night, his hospital room became a sanctuary. Nurses came just to hear him talk. One of them cried as he prayed for her. Another said she hadn't believed in God for years until she saw him breathing again. Sometimes miracles don't just save one person, they awaken everyone around them. Now, before I continue, I want to ask you something from the heart. If stories like this touch your soul, if they remind you that faith still moves mountains, I invite you to subscribe to this channel. I share real testimonies of healing, faith and hope from people I've met inside hospital walls. And if you feel led, any small PayPal donation helps us keep this mission alive, to share these encounters with the world, one story at a time. Now back to Daniel. After he left the hospital, he wasn't the same man. He didn't chase success or comfort anymore. He said, "I died once. Now I live for the one who gave me life." He started visiting patients himself, people who were where he once was, hopeless, afraid, ready to give up. One night, I found him praying beside a young man on life support, the same way Jesus once stood beside him. He whispered, "You're not alone. The healer still walks these halls." The machines around them beeped, and the doctors watched from a distance. But Daniel didn't care. He said, "This isn't just a hospital, it's his house now." And maybe he was right, because wherever faith enters, heaven follows. That young man, he woke up 3 days later. The doctors called it a miraculous recovery. Daniel just smiled and said, "I've seen this before. I've come to believe that God still writes stories like this every day. They don't always make the news. They don't always come with trumpets or fire from the sky. Sometimes they come in the quiet heartbeat of a man who shouldn't be alive. and in the tears of a wife who refused to stop praying. There's something sacred about standing beside a miracle. You realize that hospitals may hold pain, but they also hold resurrection. So if you've ever doubted that God still moves, let Daniel's story remind you. He doesn't just heal bodies, he restores faith. He brings life where the world has already signed the death certificate. And maybe, just maybe, he's about to do the same for you. Before we close, I want to invite you again. Subscribe to this channel and become part of this mission of faith. And if you can, consider supporting through PayPal. Even the smallest seed keeps this light burning. And now, I'll ask you this. Do you believe in miracles? Share your story in the comments below. Tell the world what faith has done in your life. Because somewhere out there, someone needs to hear your testimony, to know that the same Jesus who stood beside Daniel on that table is standing beside them tonight.